Good morning, everyone. Today we have Omar Ha-Redeye with us. Omar is a Toronto and Durham region lawyer. He has completed his JD and LLM from Western University and Osgoode Hall in Ontario, Canada, respectively. He is also a part-time professor at Ryerson University, and we have two of his students on the call with us. So I'm sure they're very excited to see what's to come. And if this wasn't enough, he is also the executive director of Durham Community Legal Clinic in Oshawa and has held various legal leadership positions in several different advocacy and professional organizations. In 2011, Omar was named one of the top 12 media and social media influencers practicing law in Canada, and in 2012, he was awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. While the list of accomplishments doesn't end here, I recommend you have a look at the link displayed on your screen now so you can learn more about him. Welcome, Omar. Thank you for sitting down with us. Today's interview is designed to give aspiring lawyers an insight into what the legal industry looks like. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleagues so we can get started.
Good morning, Omar. Thank you for sitting down with us. I'm just going to ask you a few academic-related questions. And I just wanted to start it off by saying, when reading your bio, I read that you had a career in nuclear medicine studying radiological hazards before becoming a lawyer. What prompted a career change from nuclear medicine to law?
So, I think it's pretty obvious that I didn't plan on being a lawyer. It should be obvious in that respect. And so I ended up in nuclear medicine technology almost as a fluke. I was looking for a very practical career, a career that would involve as little post-secondary education as possible. And as I like to say, the joke was on me because, I was very fortunate. This is in the US. I got a very good job that allowed me to do some more education. And the education continued. And I think my interests grew and expanded. I had never contemplated having a legal career at all. That's not something that I thought about. But I did an elective at Ryerson University, actually. So I was a student at Ryerson and did a law elective. And I found it so fascinating and so interesting. And subsequent to that, the program director, when I graduated, said, no, you shouldn't be doing an MBA. I was looking at doing, you shouldn't be doing this other stuff. You should be going to law school. And that just didn't, I resisted it, but eventually I gave in and one thing led to another, and there you go. You're a lawyer. That's kind of how it goes for many of us in the profession.
And if you don't mind me asking, what was it about the law class that inspired you so much? I know personally I like that law is kind of like a puzzle and you got to pull from different pieces. What is it for you that inspired you?
So I think it's the analytical way of looking at things. So being able to really scrutinize things and look at things from different perspectives. I love to do that. And so when I was a kid, my parents used to say almost disparagingly, "Oh, you should be a lawyer." Probably since I was 3 or 4. Not because I was argumentative, but it was more I was very inquisitive, and I always wanted to know, well, why does that rule exist? You're telling me to do this or telling me to do that. I want to understand the public policy rationale for why we operate our household in this manner. Okay, and so probably came across as a little bit of an annoying child, but realistically speaking, I was very much looking into the thought processes of why we do what we do, and I think my work in nuclear medicine led into health administration, which is what I studied at Ryerson, and doing health administration really opened my mind to thinking about things like public policy and rationale for why we have rules or rationale for why we do things the way that we do. And, it seemed from there to be a very short distance to going into law directly.
I like that. It's definitely a career that requires a lot of deep thinking. Next thing I wanted to ask you was that since you went to both Western Law for your JD and Osgoode Hall for your LLM, why did you decide on each law school for your degrees?
So, yeah, I think it's something to keep in mind, especially for people who are thinking about going to law school, is that there's no such thing as a bad law school in Canada, right? And so a lot of people who spend time comparing to American schools and all the things that are going on there on all those chat rooms, it's very easy to fall into that trap. And so we don't have that. All of our universities and all of our law schools are top-notch, top-quality law schools. And I can tell you this, that in the profession, nobody asks or wonders where people went to law school because it's what you do with your law degree that really matters, okay? So Western got a great education there. I think ultimately the reason why I chose it was that they had a very strong emphasis on business law. And so coming from healthcare, but with a business degree, that seemed to be something that I was very much interested in. It's obviously what then led me to teach at Ryerson in the Law and Business Department as well, right? So my interests and my work in the business field. When it comes to the Osgoode degree, it's a little bit different. So, I've been working full-time, since I got called to the bar, right? So, and even before that, quite frankly. But the difficulty of doing part-time LLM while you're working for full-time is enormously challenging. What they've done at Osgoode in their professional development department is to structure a program which is a lot easier for you to do while you're working full-time and have life responsibilities, in that you can do it on the weekends, you can do it in the evenings, it's modular in format, and you're in a cohort of other people who are also working lawyers and working professionals. And so that's why I chose that program, and I think it's been a great program. I mean, I still use some of the stuff that I've learned from that master's in my day-to-day work.
And as a follow-up, how would you describe your experience at both Western and Osgoode Hall?
Yeah, I mean, I think Western, it's not about Western, it's about law school generally. So, law school is tough. There's no way to really mince the words around that. So it has its challenges, but, it's not rocket science. It's not nuclear medicine for that matter. So what makes law school difficult, in my opinion, is really a lot of the uncertainty and the social anxiety that all of your colleagues and your peers are often exhibiting, right? So everybody's worrying about, are they going to get an articling position? Are they going to have a job? Are they going to be able to have a career in this field, which, it's perhaps uncertain, but it also means that there's a lot of opportunities for you to create yourself. And so what I think that is really what makes law school difficult is the pressures. The actual law, the substantive aspect of the law, over 3 years, you're going to learn it. And what I mean by learn it, you're going to learn how to think about the law and how to read the law and understand the law. So that's not really the challenging part. And so what I would say is that, a lot of these conversations that you're having, for example, through these types of interviews, will give aspiring lawyers greater insight into the profession from the perspective of lawyers, which matters, as opposed to anonymous people on discussion boards, which I think is a very popular source of information. And I think that in of itself will help many future law students know that things will work out, that they will have a career that will be a successful career, and that they don't need to overly think or worry about much of those concerns.
Thank you for that. That's very insightful. My final question for you is that you've held multiple leadership positions through your college years, such as president of both the Black Law Student Association and the Health Law Association. How do you feel that those prepared you for your legal career?
So it depends on how you define your legal career and what you want to do in your legal career, right? So yeah, I think being involved in things is fun, first of all, beyond anything else. You actually get to meet people and talk to people, and yes, we're doing this, via Zoom because of the pandemic, but if it wasn't for the pandemic, it would be great to hang out and have a conversation in person, right? So I think that much of our careers is not about those quantitative aspects that are typically referred to as IQ, but it's often what we're increasingly talking about as EQ, right? So the emotional quotient and the emotional intelligence, the ability to know how to communicate effectively and work well with other individuals and to build teams, okay, and to organize communities. That's a big part of what I do at the clinic, is organizing communities. All of that requires a skill set that is not taught per se in a book, in a textbook. And so, yeah, I think I never did it because I thought, hey, this is going to lead me directly to a specific career goal. I did it because I enjoyed it. And I think that's a lesson that I can sort of impart, is that if you do work or do activities that you enjoy, you will invariably pick up skills and pick up experiences that will help you down the road.
I like that take. Thank you very much for that. Those answers were amazing. Thank you again. Now I'm just going to pass you on to my colleague Sohini for a few professionally related questions.
Thank you, Nolan. I'll take it from here. Omar, how would you describe your area of law / expertise and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a litigator, I guess, is the simplest way to describe that. And a lot of what I've done in litigation was in the health law area, or in business law, or in employment law and technology law. So those were the general areas that I have practice background and history in. But I've also done a few other areas, and actually my day job nowadays at the legal clinic, I'm essentially running a not-for-profit business. So although I still engage in some litigation, so occasionally I'll appear before an administrative tribunal or in a court, the bulk of what I do right now is really just management work. That's a big part of what I do. And so having those diverse experiences beyond just a law degree, as I think many of you who are studying business degrees, for example, before going into law, those are positive experiences that I think not only helped me in my legal practice, but have helped me more broadly in a legal career because it's opened up other opportunities.
Can you tell us about your legal career from articling to your current position?
Sure. So most of that time I was a sole practitioner. So technically I was a sole practitioner, which is perhaps a little bit unusual from the perspective of law students to sort of explore. But most law students or undergrads don't realize that the vast majority of lawyers in Ontario, so upwards of 60 or 70% of all lawyers in Ontario, are sole practitioners. That is where most lawyers work. So it may not be where they start out when they're first articling or in their first few years of practice, but most of them are sole practitioners, or more broadly, or more accurately, I should say, sole or small. So, sorry, small or solo. So working with 2 or 3 perhaps other lawyers in a smaller setting. And so that's kind of where I had my career, especially in the first few years, because for me, from my perspective, I had other experiences. I had other work experiences, other careers before even going into law school. And so going into a very large firm, which was very hierarchical, and being on the very bottom of that hierarchy just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And so the flexibility that sole practice afforded me meant that I could do my master's part-time. I could volunteer in professional associations part-time in the ways that I wanted to. I could be involved in my community in the ways that I really wanted to be involved in, which I would not necessarily have the same level or degree of flexibility if I had an employer in a different context. And so, I could take on files that I wanted to, quite frankly, and take on public interest files. So lots of advantages for practicing in that context, but also a lot of challenges, because if you're doing pro bono or public interest work, there's not a lot of money in that work. You have to be everything. You have to be the manager and the marketing person and the HR person and the bookkeeper and the lawyer. Okay, so it is a lot of different pressures and different types of responsibilities. And I think the key point there is that law schools, at least historically, have never really tried to prepare lawyers in law school as to how to practice the law, right? They'll focus, if you ask any law school, they say, we teach you how to think like a lawyer. That's what they say. And that's changed in recent years. So Lakehead's law school, so Boer-Alaskan Law School, has had a very practical focus and practical emphasis. And perhaps a little bit more exciting and closer to home is the New Ryerson Law School, right? The New Ryerson Law School is premised on the assumption that its graduates will not have to engage in articling, so there's no articling requirement. You can do it if you want to. And built into the actual program will be skills that teach you how to be a practicing lawyer from the time you graduate. Now, are you going to be able to practice law in the same way as someone who's been practicing for decades? Probably not. But will you have comparable, and in my opinion, perhaps better skills and experiences than someone who's articled? Probably. Okay, and so I think that's where we're already seeing a shift in law schools to preparing for people for those types of careers, which are very much, I won't even call them alternative careers, they're very much the norm for many, many people who are graduating law school these days.
That's very, very insightful, like a lot to think about. So as Justin mentioned, you are a professor at Ryerson. Why and how did you decide to be a university professor alongside being a lawyer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going back to what I said about where I first got the inspiration to go to law school from Ryerson. I owe Ryerson an enormous debt, and I don't mean tuition debt. paid that off a while ago. Okay, an enormous debt in terms of really providing an inclusive environment, a supportive environment. The type of education I've never seen anything like since, quite frankly, okay? And so being able to give back to the school in many different ways, and so there's lots of different ways that I try to do that, has been really an honor and a privilege. And so that's where it came from, but also, it's kind of cool to be able to teach. It's fun, okay? Most of law, and so here's, I think one of the lines that you were looking for, most of the practice of law is very, very solitary. And what I mean by that is you're reading, you're researching, you're drafting memos, you're drafting legal documents, okay? You might actually have a few people looking over, but you're sending that by email. So we've been doing this social distancing, solitary type of work longer than anybody, okay, in the legal profession, okay? So we're good at doing that. But the reality is, human beings, as we all have experienced very much firsthand during this pandemic, are still social beings, okay? And so even an introvert like me, I like to actually talk to people and interact with people to a certain extent. And so teaching is like fun by far, okay? Because you can actually describe the law and tell the wonderful stories behind the legal principles in the law. It's actually a lot of fun, especially because, and I see this over and over and over again, with the undergrads, law school's a little bit different, that they take some of those classes like Law 122 at Ryerson because it's a mandatory course. Oh, I have to take this law course. But by the end of that class, they're like, you know what? That was not what I thought it was going to be. And it was actually a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be. And I'm going to switch my major over to law and business. Okay. And now I've had dozens of students over the years tell me that. And I think, not everybody has to do that. It's not for everybody. But if you can make a little bit of a difference in that way, for students to actually make the law interesting and exciting, I think I've done my job. And I think that's a very important way to give back because, again, the law was not something I knew anything about as a high school student or as an undergrad. And so having the right type of people introduce you to a new field, to a new discipline in the right way, in a way that actually is thought-provoking and interesting and exciting, I think is really just a way to channel those passions to hopefully the next generation of business leaders and lawyers.
Definitely making my degree worth a lot more now. How do you decide what case to take on? And like a follow-up to that would be, what would you say is the most interesting case you've taken on so far?
So yeah, I think there's some limitations there in terms of cases that I can actually talk about from client confidentiality perspective. And I think what I'm going to do is distinguish between the private practice component and then more like the public interest aspect of things that I do now, or I do a lot more of now. And so in private practice, the reality is you have bills, okay? You have rent to get paid, you have overhead expenses, you have a lot of other considerations that are there. And it's probably one of the most challenging aspects that many of us in the profession have, which is that nobody can actually afford a lawyer. Okay, as we like to say, we cannot, us as lawyers, if I need to hire a lawyer, I could not afford a lawyer. I could not afford to hire myself, okay? That is how complicated and expensive the legal system has become today. And so practically speaking, what that really means is that most people in Canada can only really start their legal file and then they have to give up. Okay, they can't afford to pay for a lawyer anymore. The exceptions to that would be, large corporations, okay, or small corporations if it's a business dispute and it fits in within their budget, okay, or very wealthy individuals. And I think that speaks in a very significant way to some failures of our legal system if it is only effective for those who are wealthy and privileged in society. I think that's a problem, okay? And so I think in private practice, there's always that balance. I mean, there's other exceptions. I'll mention that, like where you're doing a contingency fee arrangement. So personal injury cases and employment law often operate in those ways where the client doesn't pay up front. You get their cut on the back end, okay? And so I think in private practice, for me, the balance was always trying to figure out how you can actually still pay the bills, but then always still ensure that you have a public interest component to your practice. And so I've always done that throughout my practice, where there was always a low income or historically marginalized population or some other public interest aspects to some of my files. So as long as the bills were getting paid, those other aspects could still be very much part of what I did as a lawyer. And that was always very important to me. Moving towards the clinic system, though, we are funded by the government, okay, indirectly through LAO, Legal Aid Ontario. And the challenge there is that, yes, we get to do great work. All of our clients are at-need clients, right? It's all free services that we provide, but the challenges are different in that we don't have the resources. So whereas in the private sector, I could build the resources that I wanted to, okay? I need to get X amount of dollars in order to get certain equipment or get to certain staff or whatever else I need to do. You can do it. You have the clients that will actually allow you to build that money so that you can allocate those funds and resources to the public interest work. We don't have that same ability in this sector. And so we're trying to do some of the most important work that society needs, but with very, very limited resources. And resources include time and people, right? So very different challenges here in this context, but that's part of what informs which cases we take on and which ones we don't.
A lot to think about there as well. So in 2012, you were awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Award, Jubilee Medal. Could you talk to us about why you were awarded the medal?
So they don't really tell you who nominates you for these things or why exactly you get these, but I was involved in law reform activities, I would say, from even before I started law school. So once I decided to go to law school, I started getting involved in local politics and looking at public policy and pushing towards law reform. And so I think I was an unusual law student in that respect, in that I was far more interested perhaps in what was happening at Queen's Park than I was often in the classroom. So, it's not like I didn't go to the classroom. I still went to all my classes, but I think, the interplay between, let's say, what's happening in the legislature, or for that matter, what's happening at the Court of Appeal or at the Supreme Court of Canada, I was far more glued to a lot of those current developments because what really captured my imagination was not necessarily what the law was in the 1800s. Okay, we've all read, those wagon mound cases and whatever, right? It was more about what could the law potentially be for the future. Okay, in other words, how can the law potentially address some of the contemporary challenges that we're facing today in the society that we're in around us today? And so I think that is really what maybe informed that particular award, is that I was just involved, like I was saying before, in different organizations and community efforts and other activities that were focused around law reform.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a little rebellious side of you, Professor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice to get those types of things, of course, right? Very, very humbling as well. And I think it's important, I'll put it in this perspective, it's important perhaps to talk about those types of things because we encourage other people to also engage in those types of activities that are for the greater public good.
For sure. You were also awarded the Ontario Bar Association Award in 2015. To give our audience a better understanding about what this means, could you explain the award itself?
Yeah, so this was the inaugural OBA Foundation Award that was provided for, I think, education for the public and public legal education initiatives and stuff like that. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is I didn't come to the legal profession knowing anything about the law, knowing anything about the legal system. I didn't have the benefit of family members or friends that were lawyers. Okay, so in looking at that, I've always reflected, what would I have done differently, or would I have done things differently, or looked at things differently had I had those exposures earlier in my life or in my career. And so, I think that's been a big part of what I've always tried to do, and it's what I do now at the clinic, is we want to make the law accessible in some ways, right? So can we actually make the law more digestible? There's a huge movement towards plain writing right now in the legal community, and judges learning how to write their judgments in ways that are easier for the public to understand, because it goes back to the main purposes of the justice system. It's supposed to be not, the justice system for the wealthy and the elite or for the lawyers. It's supposed to be the public's justice system, society's justice system. It is one of those institutions of a democracy. And so if that institution of a democracy is obscure or opaque or inaccessible in some way in terms of even understanding how or why it works, then I think we're actually not as strong or robust as of a democracy as we can be. And so I think, you know, a lot of my efforts in related to that, and again, this is just stuff that I do for fun, like things like we're doing now, a conversation about, you know, the law, okay? Being involved in those types of things are not the types of things which every lawyer is necessarily passionate about being involved in. And I think being involved in those types of things does hopefully have an impact. People are interested in hearing those perspectives and insights. And by doing that, we make the legal system more accessible. And I think ultimately that's really what was behind that particular award that I received in 2015.
As a published author of the Oxford University Press, CRC Press, and Windsor Review, what are the benefits you'd say writing has for lawyers, and in specific, since we are a legal journal, for students looking to become lawyers?
Yeah, I mean, I think writing should be, or it doesn't have to be, but writing should be something that is done for fun. So I've been blogging now, legal blogging now for, wow, 13, 14 years, something like that, okay? And regularly, so at least once a week. I think it's now down to like not more than once a week, but you know, regularly writing, and it's almost like a journal. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. I don't do that writing for anybody else necessarily. I mean, I think if others read it and they tell me that they do, great, and if they can benefit from it, even better. But I do it for myself because it's part of my process of ensuring that I'm staying current, that I'm reading case law, that I'm jotting down notes and thinking about things, and I'm writing it down while I'm thinking about it, and then, you know, you put it online. And I like to emphasize that because, you know, and I'm sure as many students see, when they're looking for information, as members of the public are, they're not looking at necessarily databases, okay? They don't have access to the proprietary databases, and they may not even know what free websites like Canly are, so they're going to Google. So having that type of information out there makes a huge difference. That being said, it's a very different type of writing when you're talking about formal writing for publishing. And so I think that is important. I think there is a different approach that often I use when we're doing that type of writing. And it's good for lawyers, I think, to engage in writing, because most of what we do is not like what you see on TV. It's not standing up in front of courts and giving these great speeches and stuff like that. The vast majority of litigation is in writing. Okay, and so writing skills and learning how to write, and there's different styles of writing, depends on who your audience is, or even sometimes what your message might be, is a very, very, very important skill to have to be a successful lawyer.
For sure. To end this interview with a little bit of a curveball, if your life was a movie, what would the title be?
Wow. Okay, they didn't tell me that question was coming. All right, so
I wanted you to be unprepared, so we knew what you were going to say.
You've gotten me unprepared. So I mean, I think that I'm going to have to invoke sort of an obscure movie that I actually like, and I'm going to see how I can make that relevant to my life. It's a movie from the late '90s, so it's not that old, but it was called The Game, with I think Michael Douglas in it. Okay, and the premise behind it is, what do you get for someone who has everything? So, you know, the protagonist is a millionaire. Okay, I'm not saying I'm a millionaire, that's what I'm getting at, but like, he has everything. So his brother has to find a gift for him, and essentially gives him this whole staged game, which has his whole life upside down. And I think, not that I have a direct parallel to that particular movie, but I think the reason why that particular movie, number one, is of interest to me, and I think there's a parallel there in terms of my interests, is that it's very easy to fall into the trap, especially when you're in a student and you have student debt, or in law school and have even bigger debt, okay, to focus on the finances and say, look, I need a career that's going to pay me a lot of money because that's what I need, right, to pay down my student debt. And those are very real and practical considerations, okay? But I think in doing that, if you're too tied down with those concerns, you miss out on the real opportunities in life. And there are so many amazing things that are happening around us all the time, especially in the legal profession. As a lawyer, you have the opportunity and the ability to make a very, very significant impact in the communities that you live in, because people don't have the privilege of the education that you have. That alone, okay? You are the gatekeeper to the information about how society works. And that in of itself makes you an invaluable resource, because they can't afford you anyways, okay? An invaluable resource for the needs of your community. Okay, and for society at large, when you're talking about the political system and you know what's going on in the bigger picture, lawyers have insights into those types of things and the mechanics of our democracy in ways that others in Canada do not. And so, simply from the perspective of being a citizen, there's a level of civic engagement that I think is almost a calling, okay, for lawyers that many of us perhaps overlook or give up, because of the fact that we are too concerned, and rightly so, with the more immediate material considerations that are before us. And so I think that would be my parting message, is that law is not just about, you know, what you see on those TV shows about, you know, fancy clothes and fancy boardrooms and stuff like that. That's not really what it's about. It's actually much more profound and significant in terms of its role in our society, as I've said. And so take up those challenges if you can. Look into those opportunities about how you can use that education in a way that actually transforms society. And I think what I can promise is that you won't regret that, even if you do end up foregoing some other opportunities that may have some financial compensation attached to it.
So basically the answer to what title of your movie would be is...
The Game. That's, yeah.
There you go.
That's the name of the movie, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Justin to end the interview.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of insightful information in there. And, you know, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I am that kid who goes, when the prof asks, oh, do you have any other questions? And I'm like, yes, I do. But for the sake of this, I'm going to leave it with this. Thank you so much, Omar, for taking the time and sitting down with us today. It was absolutely delightful, and I'm sure our community will definitely take away a lot from this interview. I'd like to remind everyone to check out Omar Ha-Redeye's website to learn more about him. And finally, I'd like to thank Suhini and Nolan, who both work with me at Lawyered. And with that, we're done. Have a great day, everyone.